Hello everybody and welcome back to Juno New Origins, where last episode we basically finalized the design for this lander. It's kind of insane, but it's also fine. It works absolutely wonderfully. And at this point we can't resume the flight because we reverted it, and we need to launch this thing. I should have just gone with the launch button rather than the build button, but here we are. So we're going to put this out on the DSC launch pad, and we're going to launch this thing, put it into orbit of Drew, and then we need to find out if we can get a launch window to Silero with the extra DV that's going to cost in 600 days, because that's gonna be spicy. No doubt about it. We're in basically an optimally bad launch window. It's probably not exactly the worst that it could be, but it's pretty close. So let's get out of here. Bring this over to about a 70-degree pitch for now. There we go. And let's just let these SRBs burn right on off. So there's 50% fuel remaining left. Remaining left. Huh, okay. That's one way to put things. There's about 20% fuel remaining by the time I finish this sentence in these SRBs. There we go. And they're going to be falling off very shortly here. So I'm just checking our apoapsis here. We're at about 15 kilometers. Cool. Okay, farewell SRBs. That one was awkward. And let's bring this on over to a pitch of, I'm going to 40 here, because we're a little late on this. Okay, side boosters are still at about 60% fuel, so that's looking very solid. Okay, so at this point we are watching that apoapsis. It's at 35 kilometers. It's going to be hitting 40 very, very shortly here. So that's all looking good. We're down to 40% fuel in the side boosters. Just holding at this attitude for now. This is absolutely fine. Okay, so we're at about 60 kilometers. Let's drop this down to a 30-degree pitch for the moment. I'm going to hold here until about 70 kilometers. So there's 70. Now let's drop this down to about a 15-degree pitch or so. Still 20% fuel remaining in these side boosters, so that's looking very good. 80 kilometers for the apoapsis, so let's put this right at a 0-degree pitch. I like it. So there we go. We're going to be running out of fuel in these side stages very, very shortly here. We've got about 5% fuel left there. And we can see that apoapsis is going up reasonably nicely to about 95 kilometers for now. Okay. Goodbye, side boosters. So now we are at a thrust to weight of slightly below 1, and that is understood. We're in this core booster stage now, and we've burned 10% of that fuel. So this is looking absolutely fine for the moment. I'm just watching the time to apoapsis right now and thinking about our overall orbital velocity. I think previously we targeted 120 kilometers for the apoapsis and then circularized from there. And we'll probably do something fairly similar here. We are, of course, out of the atmosphere at this point, so there is no drag happening. That is absolutely wonderful. And we need about another, 500 meters per second to get into orbit or so. And you can see we've actually got more than that in our stage here. So this is looking pretty good. Our apoapsis is starting to push up, as is our time to apoapsis. So that's all looking absolutely magnificent. Let's put this up to 120 kilometers and then cut engines. Okay, so it's going to be a little bit more speed because we'll lose some on the way up to the apoapsis, but let's see what we've got here. So this would put us at basically a circularized 120. This would be, yeah, right about there, 413 meters per second. Go ahead and execute that. That will be absolutely fine. And we can see we've got 436 in this tank. So that was a slightly more efficient descent than the last one. I think that's absolutely fine. We'll take any fuel that we can get. Okay, so we're, of course, going to be pushing our periapsis up very shortly here. So this is our orbital insertion burn at this point, and everything is looking quite nominal thus far. There we go. Time to apoapsis is starting to go up here. That's noted. And yeah, we can see we're not quite perfectly circular, but it's definitely good enough. We have 23.2 meters per second remaining after having achieved orbit. I love it. That is about perfect. So at this point, I want to hop out over here, and I want to select Silero, make that be our target. And then we're going to come back over here. And yes, our closest approach is a very long ways away indeed. So I want to be thinking about planned burns out like perhaps this way, hypothetically. And let's see where this puts us in terms of a rendezvous. So this is interesting for sure, but the timing is definitely not right. In fact, it's nowhere near right. Okay, so let's see what happens if we burn from over here. What does that do to our overall timing? It doesn't change it very much, and I know that it's not going to, but the real question is, can we find something that we can get there with a radial burn on? So this is going to be reducing us down and like slingshotting us around the sun at this point. And that's going to be a 2 kilometer per second DV here. You can see here the timing is still not great on it. We could dial it in with a radial burn like so, and the DV on this begins to become ridiculous. This is definitely an encounter here. This would take 3 kilometers per second to get there, and I am not convinced that we would survive the heat slingshotting around Juno like that. That's pretty funny, but I mean, it's evidence that you can make this passage in 100 days. So there's definitely a way that we can dial this in. We just need to find it, is the answer. So let's think about what a burn out here and then heading out over this way might look like. So you can see here that we are wildly overshooting. We'd want it to be somewhere out over here, right? And we can see as we're here, we're on basically the exact opposite side. This is what I mean when I say that this is an optimally bad transfer window. So that's definitely problematic, to be sure. I would be interested in seeing if we could maybe get enough radial twist in here. I highly doubt it, though. Honestly, This is potentially interesting. So, we would be massively overshooting here, right? This would be in 2.06 years, which is too long. And this out here, this coast period would be a very, very long coast period. This coast period is the reason why this would be so long, and look at how fast that approach would be. This is just not great timing overall. We may have to just say, you know what? We don't get the 600 days, but we're going to do it anyway, and that would result in a failed contract. So the way that we would go about doing that, of course, is we just do it the old KSP style, right? Where we would just push ourselves out to be about here or so, and then we'd run our burn, like, out over here on the next orbit. We're about as far away from optimal as we can go. And I don't know that we can get there at this point, We could try a planned burn out this direction and see what that might bring us. But yeah, you can see here, what we really want to be doing is we really do want to have a planned burn that is going to be at a significantly different time, which is going to be sometime up over here probably. But even then, that timing is looking pretty off compared to what I expect. So the best option that we found, if we want to try this, would be that slingshot around Juno. That'd be a lot of Delta V. Do we know how much Delta V is in our entire craft at this point? I don't think we do. And the reason why I don't think we know is because it is not properly transferring in the calculations. So that is definitely a problem for us. But it is certainly interesting that we see a potential slingshot around Juno out this direction that radially propels us out like this. Although, I think now we're just impacting. Yeah, we're just impacting. We should probably change that a little bit. Something kind of like that. And that's overshooting by a lot, so we need to dial this back in this way. Oh my. Okay. I'm not successfully recreating that we had before. Let's just think about doing that burn. Maybe it was here? At this Terminator? What does that look like? Because, yeah, we definitely need to be messing around with these burns at this point. So we can just push this in like this and then get some radial tossed in there. This is a potential option, actually. So, specifically, the core issue with this is A, Delta V. This is a lot of Delta V. And B, I'm not entirely sure that we survive coming this close to Juno. I have no idea what that heat capacity is, and you can also see as another third problem with this. This Delta V is a lot. That's 3 kilometers per second on a braking burn when we get there. Not to mention 3 kilometers per second to get there. We did not plan for that level of Delta V. So there's that. That's all understood. And I don't think we should attempt this. I really don't think that's a good idea. So maybe we just do the landing and be like, you know, we don't get the money. This deadline is so tight, and we're in exactly the position we don't want to be for it. I don't know of a good way to get there from here without burning crazy amounts of Delta V to do it. Because, yeah, that would be too far away. This is a decent approach. I mean, it's not an ideal one, but it's a reasonable-ish approach. So we could do something like this and just go for it. So I'm going to go ahead and execute this. I don't expect to find a good solution here, but let's just burn off this last little bit of DV here. And then switch over to this. And this is still showing as high accuracy. Okay, so let's warp through that burn. That's going to be a 3.3 minute burn. And I just want to double check that our fuel flow is working correctly. It is. Beautiful. So that looks good. You can see in this stage, we allegedly have 3 kilometers per second. I am not sure if that includes this fuel or not. It must, right? It must be including that fuel. Okay, so this is intended to be the interplanetary transfer stage. But yeah, the timing is just terrible, and we can't really change the timing at this point, because the deadline is from when you accept it. So that means that we're just going to have to go for it. Which is definitely very awkward. Well, we're about 2/3 of the way through this burn at this point. And yeah, I think we're just not able to get there within the 600 days given our other constraints as well. If we had infinite DV, we could absolutely do it, but we don't. That's not the way this works. So we've got 3 seconds left of burn time here. And honestly, I feel like the amount of time given should change based on where you are in the transfer window. If you're in an optimally bad, like, I think it should be a range, right? Where it has like 300 to 800 days. And if you're in an optimally bad position, it gives you the 800 days. And if you're in an optimally good position, it gives you the 300 days or whatever. I'm making those numbers up just off the top of my head, but you know, something along those lines. I think that would work better, but here we are. That's not how this works. So let's go ahead and warp out over here. You'd think that the guy giving the contract would know that this is a terrible time to offer that contract. The other thing that they could do is they could just not offer the contract if you're within X number of days of it being like not a good launch window, right? That is the other option. So at this point, if we were to push out over this direction, right, we can see that our timing is definitely very bad. We can twist our orbit to some degree and bring it up over this way. But our timing is still very, very bad. You can see it's going to require a large amount of delta V to get this twisted enough. So it's going to have to be something even like this. No, even that's not going to be enough. So the actual amount of DV that we would need would be something like this. This is still 1.55 years out. And this is going to take basically all of the fuel we have left in our interplanetary transfer stage to get there. And then we'd need another 1.68 kilometers per second once we got there, plus what we would need for landing, plus what we'd need for takeoff, plus what we'd need for return. This is obviously not ideal under any circumstances. The ideal scenario here would be that we would wait an orbit or two, or just wait to take off. This is giving us a re-encounter here. Okay. So this encounter out over here is getting closer, but obviously we'd want to do the burn like out over here or so on the next orbit. Would be the way that that would be ideally working. Indeed. So if we were to do it out over this way, right, we can see that it's going to take us way too long to get there. That's going to be 1.64 years. We can bring this back over here. That would take us 300 days to get here. So that would be, like, it takes 300 days to get there under optimal situations. So I guess that 300 days is probably a little too low. I'd probably say like maybe 1 year for the low end, depending on the transfer window, and like 2.5 years on the high end, something like that. Because you got to have some phasing time if you're in a bad transfer window. Otherwise, DV requirements just go through the roof. Look at how cheap it is to get out there if you're not trying to avoid phasing time. Like, that's really low delta V. Really, really, really low. 185 meters per second to get out there. If you happen to be lined up, that's the difference here. And once you get there, like, we can see that our relative speed here is 400 meters per second, but if we did this at the apoapsis, the relative speed is going to be even lower than that, probably. So in terms of overall transfer plus braking, we're looking at, I'm guessing here, somewhere around 400 to 500 meters per second on the high end, if we're using optimal timings. We can't use optimal timings here if we want to get this deadline. So we have a choice to make. Do we want to take this deadline or not? And I'm wondering, what exactly is the Silero inclination? 0.0? Okay, so no inclination change should be necessary here. So that's fine. That's not an issue. I want to select this burn at this point. And yeah, phasing would definitely be the way to go here. You can see from where our ship is and where that closest approach point is, we're starting to get to the point down here where it's kind of okay. So we would look at, ideally, wanting to do our burn like out over here-ish, I think. Even then, yeah. Even then, we really just need phasing. The burn time would be about here, next orbit. That's the whole thing. We could dial this back a bit and try to do some radial from out here. So it would end up being something kind of like that. That would be in 1.64 years. How many days is 1.64 years? 1.64 times 365. That's 598.6 days. So that on its own won't work. This is an acceptable amount of DV, but what we'd really need to do is have the timing be like up here, right? And that means a whole lot more radial. So it would end up being something like this. So, I mean, you can see that the cost is really starting to balloon here for these missions, and we're saving minimal amounts of time. That's 1.45 years. So if we did the calculation here, 1.4 times 365, that's 529 days. That would give us 60 days once we got there to establish our orbit and do the landing. That is maybe a viable amount of time. But what if instead we were to do the burn up this direction, toss in more radial but less retrograde? That's 1.37 years, 1.11 kilometers per second. So we're still pretty far out away in the closest approach info here. I would like to dial that down a bit. But you can see as we dial that in, the amount of time that this is taking is going up. So we have to optimize for both. I'm thinking, what if we actually did this way up over here and deradialed it a little bit, but we toss in a little more here. Okay, this is going to be a lot. So that would be coming up over this direction, right? And that's really starting to get interesting, except for the DV quantities. I really don't care for the amount of DV it costs to do this kind of nonsense. So this is going to be looking at about 3 kilometers per second overall when we factor in the braking and the burn out to that point. That's going to be in 1.16 years, but is that 1.16 years from this burn or 1.16 years from right now? Because it's going to take us 202 days to arrive here. I'm going to make a quick save, and let's find out. So we're going to warp forward here a bit. This time is going down. Okay. So this time is going down. So 1.15 years is an acceptable amount of time. So to that end, we can start dialing this in a little bit. And actually, yeah, 1.89 kilometers per second. I would like to bring this down a little bit more. Let's turn that sensitivity way down. You can see as we get closer, our braking burn is going up a lot, which is not necessarily surprising. But we can bring this in to, okay, that is a 2.91 kilometer per second braking burn and is also apparently an impact on something. 56.6 kilometers, but that's going to be a 2.4 kilometer per second braking burn. I think we're going to be better off having this be further out. So if we made this fairly minimal, this would be what kind of a braking burn here? .08 kilometers per second. I mean, sure. So a fairly minimal one would be about there. So 1.08, let's let this come in a ways until that really starts to go up. So right about here or so. Okay. I have no idea if we have enough DV to pull this off. I'm going to try it. Worst that we can do is revert, right? We may have to significantly increase our amount of delta V in order to pull this off within the timing. But let's see how this goes. So that's going to be a 2.5 minute burn. Let's go ahead and accelerate that. And the real question is, how much DV are we going to have left? So we know that we're going to need to ditch these side tanks fairly soon here. So 3, 2, 1, 0. They're out of here. So now we can see that our stage DV is still not going to be enough to get us here. So we can get there in the amount of time needed, although this is now 220 days. Yeah, that's plenty of time. We can get there in the amount of time needed. We now know that for an absolute fact. The real question at this point is, do we have enough Delta V remaining to finish the mission? As long as we can get back into Silero orbit, we could send a rescue mission. And still be within budget. We could send this same craft again, but not landing, and be within budget. Okay, so there's that stage done. We're now on our landing stage. And in this stage, how much DV do we have? This claims 690, but it's going up. Yeah, this is not properly calculating. So this is, we don't actually know how much Delta V we have here. That's good to know. That's very good to know. So we currently have about 9% left on this. That's fine. And we'll see how accurate this burn ends up being. It's a really strange burn. This is not the way I would prefer to do it, but the time constraint basically requires it. Okay, so taking a look at our DV, we can see that's still going up, and that will until these tanks are fully empty. I want to make sure we're draining from these upper tanks. We are. Okay, beautiful. So we've got 88% fuel remaining here. That means we have quite a lot of DV. So that's noted. Our burn here is just about done. Okay, so that's fine. Now what we need to do is we need to warp up over here, although we're not actually... Now we have an encounter. We did not have an encounter previously. Okay, let's warp up over this way and see how this is looking. Okay, so now we need to get to this warp, right? Which should be about here in theory. I wish there was a way to warp to next encounter. That'd be a really convenient button to have. But let's just warp here for now. Okay. Are we within the encounter right now? I don't think so. Do we actually... Did this lie to me? Do we not have an encounter here right now? I'm just checking. That's an encounter. So we don't have an encounter. It lied to me. Fascinating. That is absolutely fascinating that the game lied to us there. It turned green, which made me think that there's an encounter, but there isn't. And now we're too close. We can't easily make the change. So at this point, this is non-viable. We're going to have to try it again, but we now know that there is a possibility of doing this. Okay, so that's good to know. We now know that this is, time-wise at least, viable. The real question is it delta V-wise viable? We could put another layer in the interplanetary transfer stage, in theory. I don't know if we would be able to lift that. In theory, we probably could. We could bring these up to 3 SRBs on each of these and put another layer of fuel here, right? So that would give us a lot more DV to work with, for sure. It's a theoretical option. So that would mean that we would duplicate this here, right? And then we would just place that at, say, 180 degrees, like that. Duplicate this guy, we'd put that here. Duplicate this guy, put that here. Duplicate this guy, put that here. Then we change the positioning on that. That would go like this. With the idea being that just extends our burn time up here. Then we would duplicate this guy, and we would put that at 120 degrees. Duplicate that, put that here. Duplicate this, put that here. This is to increase our thrust to weight a bit off the ground and increase the power of this first stage somewhat to compensate for the increased weight, right? Then we do the same thing out over here. I don't know if this would be enough, but we would do something like that, something like that. Oh, we don't have this fuel tank. Okay, we would do that, then this. Then we would grab this guy, change the height on it to be about there. Grab this guy, change the height on it to be about there. About like that. Okay, so this is getting more and more insane, but in theory, this should get us, I think, the power to do what we need to do. We can test that in the next episode, but we now know that this is possible. We just need to execute it correctly. So that'll be fine. That is definitely a step in the right direction. You can leave your offerings to the engagement gods in the form of likes, comments, subscribes, and bell ringings. This did not apparently place on the... It did not place on the decoupler. That's interesting. You can leave your offerings to the engagement gods in the form of likes, comments, subscribes, and bell ringings, and a very special thank you to all of the channel members for making this video possible, including ALS Gamer, Atala, Andy Magar, Ali Lee, Dark Horse, Xenocyte, Hiro Marutsu, Upper Cumberland Gamers, Nick Smarty, Dimitri H, Punching the Microphone, The Lounge STL, and all the rest. And of course, you. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to support the channel, you can click the join button down below the video, and as always, I will see you all next time, when we're almost certainly going to Silero, assuming that this booster has enough power.